Kính chào kính thưa các vị đại biểu và các
Ladies
bạn.
and gentlemen, I'm Phạm Thị Hải Ha from HUSE and Head of Department of Environmental Architecture and also a member of CCSB-VN. Before we start, allow me to remind you a couple of housekeeping things. First, you see a globe feature at the text bar at the end, which allows you to choose either the language of English or Vietnamese. And for question, you may send us the question to the chat box. And the second, please rename yourself according to the format, your name and then your affiliation. So we want to know who you are and where you're from. Now allow me to kickstart the webinar. It will run from 2 p.m. to 4:45 p.m. First, we have opening speeches, followed by presentations, and then we have a panel discussion with 5 panelists. Now, allow me to introduce the distinguished guest, Madam Vũ Thu Phương, Project Manager from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, or KAS in Vietnam. Mr. Michael Weibel, a Senior Technical Advisor of the Hope Project from Hamburg University. Mr. Douglas Schneider, the Senior Advisor of Abdul Green. Madam Vũ Thu Thủy, Deputy Director of the Center for Development of Community Initiative and Environment. Mr. Hoàng Thúc Hào, Vice President of Vietnam Association of Architects and Chief Architect of the Architect Office 1+1. Mr. Trần Trí Dũng from Capital House. Mr. Nguyễn Hoàng Quân, Deputy Director of Flamingo Holding Group and the Chief Architect of Flamingo. Dr. Nguyễn Thu Thủy, Technical Advisor of the Hope Project from Hamburg University, who will chair the panel discussion. From HUSE, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Director of International Cooperation Department, and Professor Nguyễn Văn Tuấn, Director of CCSB-VN. We welcome experts and scholars and representatives from different institutes, architects, and also people from different think tanks. Now allow me to introduce Dr. Nguyễn Tiến Dũng, Director, International Cooperation Department of HUSE. My thanks to Dr. Hải Ha. First, on behalf of HUSE, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the third Hope webinar, which is the third in a series on green building design and sustainable neighborhood development towards public health in built environment of Vietnam. So following the success of the previous 2 webinars, which is not far away in April and June, actually, the previous addresses different aspects concerning building users and health issue relating to green design. And now we will continue that line of discussion, focusing more particularly on design and sustainable neighborhood development in the specific context of Vietnam. HUSE is very pleased to work with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung from OCAS from Germany, as well as other partners. So our focal point in this project is a CCSB from HUSE and the Hamburg University, Germany. As you know, urban population in the world is increasing rapidly, and by 2050, 2/3 of the global population will live in cities. And how can we design urban buildings and neighborhoods will have a very strong impact on our sustainable development, for example, amenities, healthy environments, comfortable living environments for households and for cities, it would be very important for Vietnam as we seek to improve the living standards and well-being of urban residents. And with that aim in mind, the third HOPE project is held to give us an update and share experiences on green building designs and sustainable neighborhood development approaches and how those approaches can be adapted to Vietnamese context. And we hope that the HOPE project and the CCSB-VN will be a forum for experts to share experiences and knowledge and philosophy and sustainable building practices. To conclude, on behalf of Han Hussein and the organizing committee, I wish to thank all of you and our experts for joining the third webinar today. And I wish the webinar a great success, and I hope that we will continue this journey together, at least in the fourth webinar that will be coming very soon. My thanks to Mr. Dũng. Now may I invite Madam Vũ Thu Phương, Program Manager from CAS. My thanks to Dr. Ha and welcome to all of you. I'm pleased to meet our team, the team from Hamburg, as well as the team from CCSB-VN. Today, I'm very impressed by the sheer numbers of online participants. We have 350 at the moment, and I believe that many of you already joined us from the beginning, from the first webinar. This is the third in a series of 4 webinars in the first year of the HOPE project, health-oriented policies and sustainable building practices to promote well-being and green urban governance in Vietnam, launched by CAS and Hussein. Today, allow me to say a few words about our CAS. CAS is a political foundation that has been in operation in Vietnam for 29 years until now. And although we are officially known as a political foundation, but basically we operate in so many different fields. And we have rich experience working in Vietnam. It's almost 3 decades. CAS is the abbreviation of the name of the first chancellor of the unified Germany, and our office is named after him. We have at the moment 110 offices across the globe, operating 135 projects with a total of 1,000 staff, both German and local. And CAS is also well known in the world as one of the most prestigious think tank and advising body in terms of issues such as international cooperation, foreign policies, and security policies. But apart from foreign policies and security, CAS also pays attention to issues such as environment, climate change. And for that reasons, in our programs, we also pay special attention to mainstreaming issues on environmental protection into our agenda, because we believe those are the core values to ensure a sustainable future for generations to come. So since 2 years ago, CAS launched a new pillar, which is CAS for Innovation. We focus very much on innovation. We work with series of partners and projects. We implement studies on, for example, how Vietnamese enterprises innovate their businesses and technologies. We conduct studies to examine how policies on cycling, on circular economy is being used, and we have also this project, the projects with HUSE, which is part of that pillar. So we hope that this project, and I think you learned this from the talk by Mr. Dũng. Urbanization is escalating very rapidly, and Vietnam is no exception. Uh, in Vietnam, not everyone recognize the scale of such rapid speed. For example, Florian, our representative, share his impression about the rapid speed of urbanization in Vietnam. For example, in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, he returned to Vietnam after 13 years, and then he realized how much has changed. So in addition to more skyscrapers, we also face novel issues in urban design management, for example, carbon emission, environmental protection, energy consumption. So for all of those reasons, we believe that this project will provide important knowledge for us to understand the factors that affect the well-being, both physically and mentally, of people living in Vietnamese cities today. And for that reason, we are very pleased to work with HUSE in this project. And now we already arrived at the third webinar. And as the moderator, Ms. Ha, introduces to you, we know that we have representative from policy making bodies and also from businesses. And so in the panel discussion, I hope that we can listen to a different perspective. For example, whether there's any gap between policies and policy implementation, between policy and practice, and on the ground requirement. So we hope that after 3 years, we will really manage to contribute some concrete and substantive contribution to improving urban planning in Vietnam. So my thanks to the team from Hamburg University and HUSE, and thank all of you, and allow me to send you via the chat box some information on 2 programs being implemented by CAS in Vietnam. For example, we have some training courses in the field of environment. We have another major program, which is environmental security and sustainable development with partners in Hong Kong. So allow me to share information on those courses to you in the chat box. Please use the links as you wish. So please feel free to utilize the resources that we provide. Once again, I wish you a productive webinar. My thanks to Madam Phương. Now, may I invite Mr. Michael Weibel from Hamburg University.
Hello, everybody. Good morning to the participants in Germany. Good afternoon to the participants in Vietnam. I'm very glad to share some experience and some motivation behind HOPE project, which was developed last year at the height of the Corona pandemic. And for me and for our team, it became clear that we have to think in a more innovative way how to design our buildings and cities to promote health. So we came up with the HOPE project, and we are very thankful that Konrad Adenauer Foundation supported this with the title health-oriented policies and sustainable building practices to promote well-being and green urban governance in Vietnam. I think there's not so much a lack of technical knowledge, but a lack more of social and institutional knowledge. And we try to bring in different perspectives from different experts, from different backgrounds, to gain some new institutional innovative knowledge to bring together health with questions of urban sustainability, because we are fully convinced that a healthy living environment is really essential to provide a good quality of life. And that's basically we all aim for. We all want to have a good quality of life, and health is the most important thing of a good quality of life. And we perceive, not only in Vietnam, but on global scale, a lot of challenges to achieve this. So we want to build up cross-cutting and comprehensive basic action knowledge. So not only like theoretical knowledge from the textbook, we want to achieve action knowledge. And this will be done in the first year of the funding from Konrad Adenauer Foundation to this webinar series. Next slide, please. So we have these 3 webinars. Now the slide before. Sorry, slide before. We have 4 webinars actually. The first took place. Go up again. One more. Yeah. The first webinar. There's a slide with an overview of the 4 webinar topics. Yeah, the next one. Why is it so complicated?
No.
The first one was more an overview with one of the globally leading experts on issues of urban health, who also consults World Health Organization, WHO. We had a webinar, a second webinar, which was more dealing with issues of governance. So governance is more than government. So how to bring together different stakeholders to achieve a better regulative setting. And now today we have a webinar dealing with questions of green building design and sustainable neighborhood development. And we were very happy and also a little bit proud that one of the leading architects in Vietnam is giving a keynote presentation, and then that one of the leading consultants to green buildings certification, particularly Doug Snyder, will also provide a keynote presentation, among others, to today's event. The next event on 29th of September will deal more with questions of life cycle assessment and building materials. And I'm also very much looking to this component of our webinar series. Applicant of the HOPE project is not Hamburg University. Please move to the next slide. But a newly founded center, the so-called Competence Center for Sustainable Building in Vietnam, CCSB-VN, which was founded as a spin-off of a German government-funded project called Kammersek. And the idea of the CCSB-VN is to bundle transdisciplinary expertise of sustainable building knowledge in Vietnam, to transfer this knowledge. We call it, we are a science society interface, CCSB-VN as a science society interface to diverse areas of scientific application and to the general public, and also to overcome prevent silo mentalities, and to gain this cross-cutting action knowledge. And our vision is to develop the CCSB-VN as Vietnam's leading think and do tank in terms of sustainable building. And I'm very proud and happy that today's webinar of the HOPE project is contributing to this ambitious vision. That's all from my side. I thank a lot for your attention. I see 384 participants. I think this is a great success. Every webinar so on had an increasing number of participants. So I'm very happy and thank you a lot for your kind attention. I'm very looking to the inputs, forward to the inputs of today's webinar. Thanks so much.
Cảm ơn ông Cảm ơn cảm ơn ông Nguyễn Tiến Dũng.
My thanks to Mr. Dũng, Madam Phương, and Dr. Weibo. It's time for the presentation, I think. So in our original program, we have Professor Liliana from Texas at Austin to talk about the state of art of international research on this topic. Unfortunately, she caught COVID upon her return to the US from Japan, and she is unable to join us. The presentation will be delivered by Mr. Douglas Schneider on her behalf. We thank Douglas for accepting our invitation in the last minute. Douglas currently serves as the board member of Vietnam Green Building Council, and he's a senior advisor to Outdoor Green. Let's listen to his presentation right now. Douglas Snyder, the floor is yours. Basically, it's time for you to share your screen, and please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much for to the panel that's hosting the HOPE conference today, for inviting me to help. I know that Dr. Beltran couldn't make it, and I'm just glad that I was asked to step up, and hopefully I can fill her shoes in this role today. I'm going to quickly go over some basic concepts about green building and sustainable design, and we have the audience, I think, has a huge range of experience. Hopefully there'll be a little bit of something for everybody. And there we go. Okay, sorry, my screen wasn't advancing. So this is what I'd like to talk about today. Quickly, just a little bit, kind of a view of architecture and its role, and then getting right into sustainable design. And then some of the criteria that are used to evaluate sustainable design for buildings. Okay. So a lot of the folks in the audience are architects, so you know that what architecture does is it solves problems. Some of the types of problems that have been with us for thousands of years, we need to protect ourselves from the weather. We need family structure, so we need places that can give us the opportunity to be with our families and be with friends. We need beauty in the environment and in our built environment around us, because we spend so much time in buildings. So architecture helps us with all of these things. There's also different types of buildings, like the Taj Mahal here is a mausoleum, but it provides lots of other services, including just being beautiful.
Sorry, I don't see the screen. Did you share the screen already? I cannot see your screen.
Let me check just to make sure. Beginning. So basically, architecture solves problem sets for us. What's happened, though, is that now architecture has kind of become part of the problem, and at least in terms of environmental issues. So we now know that a lot of resources are extracted for construction. That's about 50% of the world's resource extraction, and 37% of greenhouse gas emissions. If we include the whole built environment, it's 50%. So the impact from buildings is significant, and this contributes to our footprint of consuming 1.7 basically planets worth of resources every year. We overshot our resources for this year on July 28th. So everything that's happening now is beyond what our planet can support. This is an image, it's pretty drastic, but it's from Climate Central's recalculations of what's going to happen to the Mekong Delta by 2050 because of seawater rise. And you can see what's happening actually even into Ho Chi Minh City. So this is all because of climate change and sea level rise, which is from CO2 emissions. So what is sustainability? I mean, if the architecture is going to start to engage with and be an actor in promoting sustainability, what does that mean? And ultimately, it means ecological balance. It means that we have to learn a way, figure out how to survive on this planet, provide for our needs, but also do that allowing for all of the wonderful things that are alive on our planet to exist. So it's not just us. And so then we start to think about the process of sustainable design. How do we do this? First, we have to know when to begin. And we need to begin as early as possible. Basically, during the conceptual or schematic design phase. If you try to do green building later on, after the design is finished, after the building has already been started to be constructed, it's very difficult to then apply green building techniques. And you might be able to do some, but you will not get the same kind of impact or benefit that you would if it was done in the very beginning. And it's also going to cost you more money. So you really want to do this at the conceptual phase, so you make sure it's a seamless process. The team should get together, and that really is not just the architects. It should be the architects, the engineers, the owner, ideally the construction manager, so that everybody's really on the same page. And if there's any problems, I mean, everybody has a different view of a project. They might see different issues that can come up. They can also see different opportunities, other synergistic opportunities that can come up between the different disciplines. Okay, so the first dimension that normally comes up in protocols for green building and sustainable design is the site. But the site is something that people don't normally think of. They normally just go right to the building. But we really need to look at where we're putting our buildings. Careful selection means, are we putting it in the middle of the city or are we putting on a farm? We don't really want to put buildings on farmland unless we absolutely have to. We really want to avoid that and save that for food production. Or we don't want to put it in another area that has ecological services like a wetland. So we want to keep that sensitive habitat protected, and we want to put our buildings in appropriate places. Flood zones are also not good places for buildings. We also want to make sure that our buildings have a way to connect with different services in the community, and that includes transportation. So if people have to drive 1 hour to get to work, if it's an office building, then now we have a huge carbon footprint from transportation. So really, we need to take a holistic look at sustainable design in buildings. Stormwater is a real issue. Everybody that's living in Hanoi this summer has seen a lot of flooding in the streets. And that's basically because we're paving all of our surfaces with hardscape. And we need to take a different look at what we're doing. We need to allow the water to go into the ground or use that water for services in buildings. And that is something you have to plan for. It just doesn't happen automatically. Hardscapes also become hot. There's a real effect called the urban heat island effect, which raises the temperature of cities compared to the more rural areas around them. And it's literally just hotter in the city, which with climate change coming can become a real threat to public health. And so we need to look at how to shade our landscapes, a little bit like the hospital on the right, which is in Singapore, which is bringing in a lot of vegetation for shading. Light pollution is another category. Basically, we're lighting the sky so we can't see stars anymore. But there's a way around that. There's a way to light what needs to be lit, but not light upward, which is basically wasting energy and wasting light. The second category, the second dimension is energy. And this is really the biggest one because we're looking at the major crisis of climate change, plus energy is very expensive. So the first step that has to happen in doing a very effective design on energy reduction is a good passive design. Basically, not the moving parts in the building, not the electrified parts of the building. It's the walls, the roof, the windows, things like that. So if you do a really good job on passive design, that makes your equipment smaller when you get to active design. And those two make your renewable energy smaller when you get to that part. So this is also a money-saving strategy. If you're really good in your efficiency in the first two, you can downsize your solar energy or renewables by 50% or more. So you really want to try and pay attention to these steps in order. Traditional buildings do teach us a lot. This is a picture that I took from the local ethnology museum. And we've got a vented shaded roof here from a traditional structure. People knew what they had to do to stay cool because there was no air conditioning. So you figure out pretty quick what you need to do to not cook your family. So we can see a lot of great wisdom and advice. If we just look back, even before like 1950, we see a lot of really good basic approaches, and we need to take advantage of those. We can combine those with some of our more modern techniques as well. So for passive, we're looking at where are we orienting the building? We don't want any big facades facing the east and west. We're looking at the shape of the building. How is it being shaded? Are there trees shading it? You can also use architectural shading, like this roof here in the picture, and color. If you ever put your hand on a white car, or if you put your hand on a black car in the summertime, you know that the black car is a lot harder. Or pavement, black pavement versus white concrete. The color makes a huge difference in the temperature of the surface of the building and what gets brought into the building through transmission. So here's a picture of a building that's near my old apartment, and it's not the most, maybe perhaps the most beautiful design or modern, but if you look at it, you can see 3 levels of shading. On the bottom, we have a portico that's well shaded on the first floor. If you look at the second floor, we've got some okay shading with some overhangs. And then if you look further up, the shading is not so good. Most of the building is lit. So it's as simple as that. We really need to pay attention to how our designs are affecting shading. Shading is basically free cooling. It doesn't cost any electricity, but you have to put it into the design. This is a cool roof, which is basically a white roof. So it's a commercial roof. And just by putting this EPDM roofing material on the top that's very white, it'll keep that roof much cooler, keep the top floor much cooler, and lower the costs for air conditioning. It's also nice to open windows in the shoulder seasons in the spring and fall when it's not too hot or cold, and you can get some free cooling. And in our tropical climate, really important to insulate roofs and kind of look at your windows and how you're selecting those. I don't have time to go into that in detail, but it's different in temperate climates like in Europe or the United States, but here we really have to pay attention to the sun overhead. The second dimension is our equipment. So air conditioning, obviously where we are here right now, is really important. It's the #1 consumer of electricity for us. Also, we need to look at how we're lighting our buildings because that also consumes a lot. We can use the sun for daylighting to hopefully cut down on some of what we're using for electricity, combine that with LED lights. And then also ventilation. So one thing is ventilation doesn't always happen, but if it does happen, we need to do it in a good way. And this type of technology, which is very simple, it has a couple fans and a honeycomb core that does heat exchange. There's no pumps like an air conditioner, but this type of technology can be 80% efficient at cooling the temperature of the air that's being brought in from outside, and also about 50% efficient at reducing the humidity of the air that's being brought in from the outside. So these are fantastic tools. They're called ERVs. I always specify them in projects. Also for any pumps that might be in the building, VFDs, that's for the engineers in the crowd, and right sizing. So if we do a good job with our passive design and we do a good job with choosing the right equipment, we can lower the sizing of the equipment, especially cooling that we need in our buildings. This is a huge money savings. This can offset what you might spend extra on windows or something like that. So if you can reduce the size of your equipment by 50%, fantastic. Okay. And the last is renewable energy. So the first building here on the left is designed by Alithis. It's in Dijon, France. And this is a net zero energy building. So basically they use the same approach and come up with an office tower that provides all of its own energy. And it's possible with that design. The Bullet building here in Seattle is a little more dramatic on the PV panels on the roof, but they do provide shading, which is kind of nice. And this is also a net zero energy building, meaning it provides all of its own energy. So that's what you can do if you follow these steps in the right order. Even if you come to near zero, that's fantastic. The next dimension is water. And I want everybody to think of water, not just as water, but as energy, because that water has to be pumped to where we are. And it takes huge pumps and a lot of energy to do that. The way to be efficient with water is to choose the right basics, toilets, showers, faucets. That makes a huge difference. Once you've done that, which does not cost any more, then you're looking at different ways, different places to get your water. So you could be getting it from rainwater on the roof, which this is a picture of, or gray water, which is using your soapy water for irrigation or maybe toilet flushing. This is also a really good thing for kind of emergencies in cities where utility water is not supplied. So if the water is contaminated, or if there's a storm and there's power loss because of climate change, this kind of a building can survive. It can still flush its toilets. People can still take showers. So this is also a resilience strategy. Okay, the next category is materials. So kind of the biggest thing in materials in the last 5 to 10 years in sustainable design is to try and really have a life cycle understanding of materials. Not just, is this coming from a bad source, or is this going to poison me in my building? But the entire, from extraction of the resource to manufacturing, what happens in the factory? How is it used in the building? And then how is it disposed of at the end of life? And so now there's metrics and there's tools and software that can provide you some kind of an understanding of that. And that's called life cycle analysis. So things are getting much more sophisticated with materials now. Construction waste is at the end of the life cycle. And we know that, for example, in the United States, projects that get LEED certified often, they can get 95% diversion from landfill. Basically 95% of their material waste is not going to a landfill from construction projects. And if it can happen there, honestly, it can happen anywhere. The construction industry is not necessarily the most advanced in the United States. We really just need to connect the dots between those materials and who needs them. The other thing is beautiful buildings, right? We want our buildings to last a long time, because the most efficient building is basically the one that's never built, or the one that we keep around. As soon as we destroy a building and build a new building, we're using a lot of resources and energy. So buildings like Notre Dame here, it's loved, it's cherished, and it's not going anywhere, even after a massive fire. So we need to think about our buildings as, how can we make them precious? How can we make them valuable? How can we make them loved so that we really take care of them and we really keep them for a long time? And here's a website that you can go to for sustainable materials. There's actually quite a few websites now that provide, this is, I think, around 10,000 items on this website. So you architects can check that out. The last category is health. And this one was from the introduction from Michael, is key. It's right. I mean, we have to take care of our health. It's our self-interest. And so let's take a look at that. So we do spend 90% of our time indoors, which means we have to take care of what's happening inside our buildings. Maybe walk outside sometimes. So one is that people don't realize that there's a lot of pollution inside a building as well as outside. People always think outside the building, air pollution might be bad, but depending on where you live and depending on the type of building, your pollution inside could be 5 times as bad as it is outside. So part of that is the materials that we put into a building. We don't want to put toxic materials in our buildings, because that builds up in dust and it builds up in the air as gases, and it's not good for babies when they're crawling on their hands and basically crawling and then putting their hands in their mouth, because children do that. So we have to be very careful about the types of materials that we're putting in our buildings. One way to help reduce that exposure is fresh air. We need fresh air for lots of reasons. We need fresh air because we breathe CO2. And if you're in a very busy office, the CO2 will go up and you will get sleepy. That's not good for productivity. So if you're a building manager, an office manager, you don't want no ventilation in your busy office, because people will not be as productive. So we need fresh air for that. And we also need fresh air because of the potential air pollution that might be building up in the building. We do have to do it in a careful way, though. We have to use appropriate air filters, and that's a little bit technical, but it's possible and it's doable and it should be done. The other is biophilia and daylight. So biophilia just means that human beings, we evolved with nature, and we need nature. We need to be connected to it. And when we are connected to nature, our stress hormones are reduced. So that's good for your health. The other is daylight. So daylight can also increase productivity. It gives a better rendering of color. So the colors of things that you see around you are much more vivid and more true when you have daylight. And it's just a better quality of light, and there's more of it. it's also free. So, so having connection to nature through biophilia and also good access to daylight, which is what this diagram is showing how you can achieve it to some degree, are really key for health. Here's an example of a picture that I took of an office. One of the windows is tinted, the other window is not. So the only difference is what was some film that was put on the windows on the left. And you can see how kind of dark and gloomy it is on the window on the left and how more true to daylight it is on the right. And the other is exercise. Like, we really need to be moving. And there are ways to design buildings to invite and encourage people to use stairs, basically to make them bigger and wider and easier to get to, easier access. We also want places where people can exercise in buildings if possible. We want to put parking for bicycles in buildings so people can come to work by bike to exercise. So there's a lot of ways we can encourage movement in the workplace and in buildings. And all of this adds up to performance, which is good for businesses, but also health benefits, which is obviously good for everybody, including in the home. A lot of these features are also part of resilient design, but I don't have time actually today to go into that. Okay, so this is kind of a wrap up. So basically we have a lot of growth at this point. Green building's been around for about 20 years in a modern sense. And the World Green Building Council is kind of overseeing a lot of that. And there's a lot of member organizations in that. There's 70 green building councils, including the Vietnam Green Building Council. And in 2014, currently I think it's probably higher, but in 2014, the net zero commitments around the world from the International Union of Architects was 124, which you can see on the screen. So all those countries are committing to building net zero buildings by 2050, which is only 28 years away. So we can't wait until 2050. We have to be doing it before then. Also, we have a lot of energy simulation software for the engineers and architects out there that might want to try it. We have lots of protocols to use that basically give us a menu and a lot of guidance to use for getting certifications. And the cost increase is really mild. At 1 to 3%, I think in Vietnam, VGBC did a study, it was around 1.4% on average. So we're not looking at a lot of money, and the payback is usually in the 6 months to 2 years, maybe a little bit longer if you do a super green building. But cost should not be something that's intimidating any developer or any architect. And this needs to be explained to investors. And there's opportunity, right? If you become a consultant, we encourage everybody who's an architect or an engineer. This is not rocket science. You can learn this pretty quickly. If you just do one green building project, you probably won't need a green building consultant in the second one, or maybe the third, unless you just want somebody else to do that paperwork. But basically, it's very doable. So takeaways, we have to take seriously the impact of buildings and the power that architects and designers have to limit that impact on the environment. It's tremendous. It's actually the largest sector in the world. Also, sustainable design is not that difficult to do. It's just making the right choices and having informed choices. And also, we need to bring in that design early to get the biggest benefit, the biggest bang for our buck, as we say in the United States. And we can do it. You know, we could really make buildings healthier for people, healthier for the planet. Now's the time. We really have to become experts at all of this now. And don't be afraid to start, because there's plenty of support. So I think that's all I have to say today. And thanks very much for your time and your attention. So I'll stop sharing.
Cảm ơn Douglas.
My thanks to Mr. Douglas Schneider. Fascinating presentation. You summarize how we mainstream issues such as environmental protection, energy consumptions, and human health in green building design. He emphasized, for example, that we need to think about green building at the conception phase of and the building, and other important recommendation. So thank you. Now may I invite Dr. Đặng Ánh Nguyệt from the Center for Development of Community Initiative, who will talk about criteria for sustainable urban community and cities in Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so pleased to introduce Madame Bùi Thanh Thủy, Deputy Director of the Center and the coordinator of many training courses to improve people's health on and people's knowledge on the importance of eco buildings. Dr. Đặng Ánh Nguyệt is the other speaker, is the research and training coordinator of the Center for Development of Community Initiatives. Now may I invite the two speakers, Dr. Nguyệt and Dr. Thủy, to present. The next slide, please. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about several things. First, why we need to identify criteria for sustainable urban community in Vietnam. And second, we introduce the center and our research activities. Third, we talk about the criteria that we identify for sustainable urban communities and cities. So I would skip the Q&A. The Q&A will be for later. As previous speaker mentioned, you know that in Vietnam, we are witnessing rapid urbanization. And by 2050, 58% of the population of Vietnam will be living in cities. So in that context, our cities are facing a series of problems concerning environment due to limited access to fresh water, flooding, poor management of hard waste, traffic jams, and according to the ministries of environment, environmental problems are costing Vietnamese cities a tremendous amount of resources and money, and also having a huge impact on people's health. For example, many people in cities are now facing issues such as malnutrition, obesity, and lung problems. And at the same time, we are seeing inequality amongst different urban populations. For example, the poorer people amongst the cities, low income earners, many of them cannot access key services such as social housing and healthcare, and many of them have to live in area of low security level. And with all of these factors, we see that if cities are poorly managed and in an unsustainable way, people's health will be seriously influenced. And we want to again emphasize the impact of poor urban governance on people's health, particularly amongst the poorest people. So in that context, we need urgent solutions to reform the way we design and manage our cities and also neighborhoods, how to make our neighborhoods safe, harmonious, environmentally friendly. We need to transform issues such as traffic, healthcare, green space, buildings, drainage, etc., and resilient, etc. However, although we now agree that sustainability is the norm, but the definition of sustainability is then differently understood in different contexts. In Vietnam, we stand in the middle of debates concerning what counts as sustainable urban communities. Vietnam developed a series of national standards on sustainability. We have ISO 37, the ISO 2018, and the ISO 151. However, although we have those standards, we do not have a system of data gathering which ensure that we can actually apply those standards in practice. So at the moment, we believe that we may need a different solution. We need another set of criteria to define sustainability. And for that reason, our center decided to come up with a new set of criteria for sustainable urban communities in Vietnam. So very briefly about the Center for Development of Community Initiatives. Our center was established in 2018. We launched a series of communication programs for education on eco-life, right-based approach. So we also provide education to ethnic minorities and vulnerable groups on how to gain their rights when they live in cities. So as you see, we have several targets group, ethnic minority. For ethnic minorities, we help them understand their rights and responsibilities. For example, what will be their rights in the process of urban development, how their livelihoods can be affected. And so we form community-based organizations to help them claim their rightful entitlements. And those organizations, those community-based organizations, they also have discussion with local governments. For example, in Quảng Nam and in Huế, there was a project to support ethnic minority people to negotiate with local government concerning the use of local forest. And we also work with ethnic minority women. The second target groups include school children, teachers, and parents. We want to give them motivation to contribute to environmental protection. We form a network of national conferences to advocate for responsible consumption models, for example, responsible food consumption, responsible tourism. So, for example, we encourage people, if they are tourists, what kind of behaviors they should follow in order to protect the environment, to avoid littering in important beauty spots, for example. We have many projects, for example, the projects on community collaboration for climate change. We gather thousands of students in the projects. We also gather young people and college students calling. So the project coaching, for example, how our young people can learn to live a green life and how we can recycle food. And we have gathered a large numbers of college students. We also organized an eco week in 2013. And one of the key operation of our center is to develop a criteria for sustainable urban community and cities in Vietnam. We have a series of criteria. So the aim is that the criteria will help us monitor and evaluate the levels of sustainability of urban environment. In order to come up with a set of criteria, we first conduct a literature review, and then we evaluate the legal and policy frameworks, and then we conducted qualitative data using also quantitative surveys and in-depth interviews with 38 participants. So basically, we combine both quantitative surveys and qualitative data from in-depth interviews. So about the result of our research, so we built on the literature, and then we come up with 5 criteria which we adapt from European set of criteria and also the UN SDGs, and then we come up with this frame. This frame of evaluation allowed us to examine the sustainability of built environment in Vietnam, focusing on 5 dimension: space, governance, social dimension, economic dimension, and environmental dimension. So in terms of space, we emphasize issues such as sustainable land use and urban planning, or good public spaces and environment. In terms of governance, we emphasize citizens' participations and transparency. In terms of social dimension, we emphasize issues such as social and intergenerational equity and inclusive education. In terms of economic dimension, we emphasize sustainable consumption and job opportunities. In terms of environment, we emphasize biodiversity and the resilience against climate change. And then after we have the criteria, we apply the new sets of criteria to evaluate sustainability of 3 locations. First, in Hanoi. Hanoi is ranked as the least sustainable amongst the 3 cities that we evaluate compared to Da Nang and Cần Thơ. So Da Nang is slightly better compared to Hanoi. So Da Nang scores between almost 4 out of 5 on our scale. And then Cần Thơ performs quite similar to Da Nang. There's some slight differences in different criteria, as you can see, but basically Cần Thơ is still better than Hanoi, still performs better than Hanoi. So this is the summary when we compare the 3 cities where we apply our set of criteria. So in some category, Da Nang outperforms Cần Thơ and Hanoi. And when we conduct qualitative surveys in Da Nang, we also confirm the points from quantitative surveys. So Cần Thơ also performed quite well. Hanoi, however, ranks the lowest out of the 3. So in total, we have 16 criteria, and building on the scores from the 16 criteria, we compute a kind of cumulative score, and here we see that Hanoi ranked the lowest, while Cần Thơ and Da Nang perform better and are considered more sustainable by our criteria. And our study shows that within one city, within any city, there is obvious disparities, which means that some disadvantaged and vulnerable groups will face more difficulties even in the city that perform quite well. So, and again, we emphasize that some modifications should be made. For example, sometimes we believe that the scores of a city depends a lot on subjective perception. So, for example, in one city, people may have a higher expectation, and so they rank the city quite low, while in some city, although the city performed quite well on our score, however, it's very much because the people in those city, they do not have too high expectation, so they easily accept the condition of their living. And for that reason, even though we from our perspective believe that their conditions should still be improved, but many participants, many local respondents are satisfied with the environment. So again, we think that we need some modification to our model in order to reduce the subjective aspect of responses. And another thing is that we also need to include more issues as criteria. For example, issues such as levels of corruption and gender equality have not been mainstream in this model. So I have talked about the criteria, but then I want to talk about some specific issues, which is health, and which is the main focus of this project. You know that there have been several approaches to deal with health issues in urban context. The first is the medical model, which emphasize the physical health. The second is the social models, which focuses on social life, social cohesion. There are also models of using the psychological approach. And there's another model which use the eco approach, emphasizing in particular the impact of changes in the ecosystem on the health of urban citizens. And according to WHO, we need to pay attention to all factors that may affect the health of urban residents. For example, age, sex, housing, services, unemployment, work environment, education, food supply, and culture. So basically, in order to evaluate whether an urban communities are sustainable, we believe that we must include a wide variety of factors, not just physical health and so forth, but also other issues such as social and cultural. And here, allow me to introduce a particular tool, which is the Urban Health Index provided by WHO. It was developed by Weaver et al. In 2014. And this index allowed us a kind of flexible evaluation. So this index share many similarity with our set of criteria. It focuses, as you can see, on health, environment, geography, economics, and socio and demographics. And for each set of criteria, there are different specific criteria. For example, healthcare. In health, we have healthcare distribution, healthcare access, immunization, healthcare cost. And this the WHO also provide us with a room of flexibility in the manuals, which means that we can kind of adjust this index flexibly depending on our goal. So in a report in 2015, using this index to measure the sustainability of 57 cities in 54 countries in the world, and they compute the UHI for those cities, and they also compute specific criteria, for example, children's health or environment, etc. In terms of so they use some question, for example, they measures gender equality, for example, how many people, how many women believing that they enjoy a gender equal life, or they have access to basic services. They also compute the indicator on children, for example, how many children receive sufficient immunization. So I just give you an overview of urban health index. And so the point is that this kind of tool allowed us to utilize different sub criteria. We don't need to utilize the full set. We can pick certain set, certain criteria that suits our needs in different contexts. So if we want to compute the issues of health or housing or children's health, it's up to us to utilize this tool in the way we want. So basically, our recommendation is that we need to use the available tool in a flexible way, tailored to our needs. And again, we have the advantage, which is that we also have existing data sources that we can use before we conduct our qualitative and quantitative surveys of our zone. For example, Vietnam have the 2019 population and housing census, which provide lots of data about housing conditions and utilities. So we can utilize those data in order to fill the gap that our surveys cannot provide. And my final recommendation is that we have the solutions from the existing examples that we can use for the Vietnamese context. So to conclude, allowed us to express our thanks to the FES, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, for supporting the study. We also want to thank the 60 respondents to our questionnaire and 38 who participated in our in-depth interviews. We also interview official experts and people from different fields, for example, planning and investment. And we want to thank our team members Nguyệt Tuấn, Hoa Thúy, Hoàng, and Hoan, who contributed to different phases of the project. My thanks to Dr. Nguyệt for giving us a summary of the a set of criteria for sustainable urban communities in Vietnam. Using the criteria, they evaluate 3 cities, Hanoi, Da Nang, and Cần Thơ. Now, may I invite the third speakers, architect Hoàng Trúc Hào, who is the Vice President of Vietnam Association of Architects, and he's the Chief Architect of the Architecture Office of 1+1. He has won many awards. He's the first Vietnamese to win many awards from the International Association of Architects. He has supervised 90 community-based buildings using environmental friendly materials and design techniques. So my presentation will be about green agriculture, architecture, and how we can utilize traditional architecture in modern day design. And we call this the acculturation. So basically it's the adaptation of traditional architectural design in modern day projects. So I will use 3 examples from 3 different projects.
Các bạn đều biết là toàn cầu hóa đem lại
We know that globalization is a symbol of progress, but also a symbol of problem. And you say this is a key symbol of globalization, people living in cloning neighborhood. If you look at those, you wouldn't be able to tell where it is in Europe, in Asia, or in Africa. And one key problem with those neighborhoods is that they create urban heat island, which is very damaging to humans' health. By contrast, we have some model of designs that really emphasize the perseverance and restoration of biological ecosystem. This is the middle of Manhattan. They create a natural lungs in the middle of a chain of skyscraper, which contribute to improving the living conditions. And this is the Salt Lake in Hanoi. The lake is situated in the middle of a densely populated area, and at the moment is considered the green lung of the cities. Of course, I do not deny the many problems that we are currently facing. And many of our architects are now trying to restore this space to its original state before rapid urbanization creates many problems for it. In Vietnam, we see also many other examples in which architectural designs are built on traditional methods, which is very much environmentally friendly and using natural condition. For example, this is in Hoi An, the traditional roofing structure with open air courtyards that facilitates a natural ventilation and sunlight. So those images, I use those images to give you an idea about what we are trying to do. The first is the emphasis on humans' health, and the second is the utilization of cultural traditions in modern architecture. We want to develop projects that allow Vietnamese cities to have its trademark DNA, which means that we utilize the traditional values in architecture in our modern day buildings. So for example, if you look at Vietnamese villages, and the Vietnamese villages are normally designed using some kind of very distinctive structure, with a very typical landscape. In a village, you will see a village gate. We see very small alleys, and there's also bamboo fences. So basically in our villages, there is no hard fencing that separate the village from the outside, but very natural fencing marked by bamboo fences. And another thing is that the traditional Vietnamese villages are also a fully circular ecosystem, which is very symbiotic with nature. This is very typical of traditional housing in Vietnam in the past, which is the VAC garden, ponds, and pigsty. So before they build a house, they will dig a pond. The soil will be used to build a house and also the cage. And then the ponds, so the excrement from humans' life will be used as food for the fish as well. And furthermore, in Vietnamese villages, the houses, the directions of the house will follow very much the natural conditions in order to maximize sunlight as well as to minimize exposure. And another thing about the villages is that the design of the village would facilitate social relationship and cohesions, because we understand that proper sustainable living means not only physical buildings, but also the social relationships and the sense of belonging and community that can be created by specific design and architecture. So within a village, as you can imagine, the way the village is structured facilitates social cohesion. So we want to build on those ideas. We want to utilize the village style architectural values in our modern architectural village projects. So I will use three examples: the jackfruit village in Hanoi, the vertical village also in Hanoi, and another one, the workers village. Now, the jackfruit village, we want to utilize a traditional architectural style which emphasize the self-sustaining and circular economy. So all the buildings, we try to maximize the natural shade. So the roof is designed similar to the canopy. So the houses rely on trees. And the layouts of houses are very diverse. So we do not use a consistent design. So the houses, the designs of the houses are different in order to utilize the topography. So at the high grounds at the center, there is the ancestral house, and the ancestral house is surrounded by bungalows in the surrounding. And when we build this village, we retain the original terrain. So for example, the water surface, and we build the houses in ways that facilitates both airflows as well as drainage. And the village is designed in ways that allows not only drainage, but also water collection. So we allow rainwater to be collected into the ponds, and the ponds is used for rearing fish. And this is the typical designs of a building. We use the local thatch roof, which is environmentally friendly, and we use adobe brick for the walls. And as you can see, all the houses are almost mixed with the tree. The houses are blended with the trees. And so we utilize the idea of the villages in the past where houses are built in ways that really mix with nature. And this house, this is called the Tomodachi retreat. We use the symbols of an arm, and you see the materials, mostly bamboo sticks as the main material. The roof and the design of the houses, as you can see, are flexibly designed so that they maximize the harmony with the topography. We do not level the topography for the building, but we construct the building so as to align the building with the topography. So basically, the idea of the jackfruit village, we've tried to recreate a village. We want to emphasize the harmony between buildings and nature, as you can see. Another example, it's what we call the vertical village at the center of Hanoi. In Hanoi nowadays, we see lots of skyscraper and apartment blocks that we can also see in other places like Singapore. But then we want to recreate the ideas of the hung gardens. We don't want to build buildings that are too high. We want to build buildings that are of a decent height, no more than 20 floors. And this is the panoramas of our vertical village. In Hanoi, as you can see in the surrounding, there's a limited green spaces. But we convinced the owner of this building not to try to maximize the commercial space, the commercial floor of the building. Instead, we convince the owner to maximize the green spaces of the building. And again, the layouts of apartments, there's no kind of consistent design. Each apartments are designed differently. Even the balconies are designed differently. And in the future, we want to create more building of this kind, which we call the green oasis. And they will create the green dots in areas that are defined by concrete. So this is the vertical design of the building. So each floor will have different style of shadings, different green areas. So people who want to enjoy more green areas may have an option. And this building, as you can see, is located at one of the most focal traffic junction in Hanoi. And the design allowed the residents to enjoy a better living standards. And you can see that we even try to incorporate big trees in this building. As you can see, this is a very bustling traffic junction, and we have a green spot right there. And I believe that people living in this building will enjoy better living standards. As you can see, this building utilizes not just straight lines, but lots of curve, and also the buildings are designed not in consistent way, but in different styles. And it's really friendly. So the curve, the shades, so we always try to create a large shades for every apartment. Because in Vietnam, it's a tropical city, the shades are crucial. The shades allows natural cooling. So the ideas of the vertical village is that we adopt the village structure, but we make it vertical. And then the idea is that we create a self-sustaining ecosystem that utilize open spaces, green spaces. And in the future, we want to incorporate more natural feature, for example, even ponds on high ground. The third project is the workers' village. This is constructed in Bảo Thắng in Lào Cai in the northern part of Vietnam. So this is the residential area for workers working for local chemical plants. The workers, they come from different regions. And so we aim to create a village for them all. So this is the master plan of the project. We want to design not just a place for the workers to live and sleep, but we want to maximize the sense of a community. So for example, our buildings is designed in ways that the resident will sit in one room and they can see people on the other side. And for that reason, we design the alleys and balcony in ways that are friendly and safe. Children can run and play on the corridor, and the corridor facilitate different views. People sitting or standing on the corridor may see people on the other buildings, and they can look down on the common yards below. And then we, as you can see, we try to maximize the shade using the many trees that we plant. And so the idea behind this is that we want to create a community, not just a residential quarter. So they want to allow the worker a sense of peace, and it will help with the health, the mental and the physical health of the workers. As you can see, workers, they come from different places. They may feel homesick, they may miss their home. But then if we can recreate a sense of a community right here, it will help with their mental health. And this this building also utilize the recycling model. We have the irrigation system on the top. We use the solar panels. So this is the concept design. This is the facade. Even at night, you can see that the buildings is a combination of the contrast between light and half a years ago. We took those pictures half a years ago. And so the buildings are, as you can see, very friendly. So the building was built 7 years ago, 7 years ago. And at the moment, as you know, the Vietnamese government are encouraging the buildings of workers apartments block in ways that are green and friendly. And this is a project that has received acclaim by the Ministries of Civil Engineering and Vietnam Confederations of Labor. As you can see, this is the corridor. The corridor facilitates a friendly space for people and children. So the ideas of the workers' village, we design the buildings to maximize social cohesion. So for example, workers, just like villagers, they stand on one building, but then they can call out to their fellow workers on the other side, and which is very similar to the village where houses are tightly knit together. So using the three examples and the experiences that we learn after 20 years. So we believe that in order to have a decent, sustainable project, it is normally quite difficult. For example, we need to persuade the owner of the buildings. However, during situations such as COVID-19, the projects of the kind that I've just shown you show stronger resilience. So for example, during COVID-19, if somebody is infected, and then it is quite easy to isolate them. And at the same time, even when they were isolated, they still live within the care and the mental support of the community surrounding. They won't feel lonely and isolated. So we believe that in order to facilitate projects of such kind in the future, it's so important to raise the social awareness or consciousness about sustainable development. At the moment in Vietnam, we already have a series of laws and guidelines. For example, the government is about to promulgate a new decree to guide the implementation of our law on architecture. So in order to make sure that the laws are really converted into actual sustainable buildings, we need architects. The architects will serve as example. They should commit to sustainable projects to come up with novel creative ideas. And then we also need the third factor, which is the social resources. We need enterprise owners, we need building owners who really have a long-term visions, who are not those who only try to maximize short-term profits, but who have a long-term vision about the value and the economic value of sustainable buildings. And if we can combine the three, we will be able to promote social consciousness about sustainable buildings. In Vietnam at the moment, I doubt that we have developed such social consciousness. For example, in Vietnam, the rich people, they love architectural design of such kind. As you can see, those designs look very nice, but they really costly to build and also costly for maintenance. And they are very, very environmentally unfriendly. Unfortunately, buildings of such kinds are now being considered the norms among many richer groups. So basically, I want to emphasize that in order to promote a sustainable life, we need to deal with a series of challenges. And not just the challenges in terms of science and technology, but also the challenges in terms of culture, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of social awareness.
Chúng ta có thể có những cái mã gen như thế này, đúng không? Chúng ta có thể làm ra được nghìn ông anh xanh, nghìn ông lô cốc bije như trong cái câu chuyện.
So this is an example that I want to use to talk about DNA and cloning. So basically what we want to do is to have a diverse model that utilizes local conditions. So Einstein or Le Corbusier are great, but we should not try to clone them everywhere. So this picture demonstrates the problem with cloning. We try to impose a simple model everywhere in the world. Why? In fact, we should try to utilize local conditions, cultural traditions, in order to both to preserve cultural diversity, but also to utilize cultural knowledge in modern day architecture. And in that course, architect should take the lead. The architect will be the doctor that provides the solution for our architectural problems. My thanks to Dr. Hao for sharing with us a series of examples about how to utilize traditional architectural styles of Vietnam into modern day buildings, and he also emphasized the importance of developing a social consciousness about sustainable buildings. So once again, I wish to thank all the speakers for your presentations. And now we will have the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Dr. Nguyễn Thu Thủy, the technical advisor from Hamburg University.
Sau đây thì tôi xin được bắt đầu phiên thảo luận.
Now allow me to begin the panel discussion. We have around 1 hour for the discussion. In the panel discussion, we look forward to comments by our experts and keynote speakers, and then we will have the open Q&A where we allow speakers to respond to questions and comments from the audience. We will now have the opportunity to dig further into key issues, for example, the connections between green designs and citizens' health, the role of sustainable neighborhood development in planning a healthy city. And we look forward to your recommendations for Vietnam policies, practices, and recommendations, how we can develop and operate green buildings in Vietnam. So we're pleased to welcome the 3 keynote speakers who have just given us a very inspirational presentations on issues such as the factors deciding or determining green design, the criteria for evaluating green cities in Vietnam, and how to adapt villages, traditional architecture in modern day buildings. And we will welcome 2 more speakers, Mr. Nguyễn Thuận Quân from Flamingo Group and Mr. Trần Trí Dũng from Capital House. Now may I invite Mr. Trần Trí Dũng to share his comments. You may share your view on the topic of the webinar, as well as his experiences in the design and operation of green buildings in Vietnam. Dũng studied architecture at the Technical University in Berlin, and currently he's working at Capitol House with lots of experiences in the application of green solutions in architecture and construction. He has led many design projects that earn green certificates, EDGE, for example. Dũng, the floor is yours. Good afternoon to ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dũng, currently working at Capitol House. I wish to share a few experiences on building and operating green buildings during my work at Capitol House. The topic of the webinar today, the focus is on community health. And my definition of community health, similar to architect health, it refers to physical health, the comfort during life and mobility, and mental health as well. Concerning physical health, bodily health, in our initial project, which are named Eco 1 and Eco 2, which are social housing projects. So my boss gave us a direction, which is that we must incorporate the green element in our projects. So the idea is that we need to facilitate natural ventilation, utilize daylight, and using sustainable materials, for example, adobe bricks and high capacity LED light bulbs, and the use of solar panels for energy. So in the project, as you can see, we try to incorporate a substantial level of coverage of green spaces in order to improve the landscape, as well as to reduce the heat island effect. So in order to make sure that our customers really have a green life where their health is protected when they live and work in our project. So after the first two projects, we learned some experiences. And then we developed some toolkits. And then we also utilize toolkits on green buildings in the world. For example, the green match for infrastructure, the EDGE and the Lotus from Vietnam Green Building Council. And in order to be certified by those standards, we have to apply the standards of those, to apply their standards from the beginning, from the conception phase. We hire external consultants to provide us with the consistent guidelines from the beginning. For example, the design, the material use, the planning, the infrastructure. So for infrastructure, using the green mud toolkits, we make a decision on transport connection, landscape amenities, and we also use software to calculate energy consumption, energy usage. We also calculate the effects of CFD, shading, airflows, and by building on that, we come up with solutions for maximum air ventilation, as well as a smart energy management system. For landscape, we also maximize the use of surface of a water surface. The water surface not only serve to improve the landscape, but also serve to maximize water recollection. We also use adobe bricks in order to minimize the heat island effect, as well as the hardening of our key surfaces. We also allocate a larger space for pedestrians and cyclists in the design of our infrastructure surrounding the project. We also utilize the standards from the EDGE standards in terms of energy, sustainable materials, and water use. In addition, we also utilize a passive architecture. For example, we create lines and holes that maximize sunlight and natural air ventilation. We also maximize the use of adobe bricks that can reduce the carbon emission. And in the facades, in the outer facades, we compute specific ratios of glass to walls and the ratio of window to walls according to green standards. And we also use paints that have low VOC. And we often use the white and bright color to reduce heat absorption. When we use glass, we always use the low specialized glass for buildings that have the facade facing the west, which is often exposed to sunlight. This is we have some example. For example, the Eco 3 is amongst the first to receive the certificate of green buildings in Vietnam. By far, our corporation received a total of 10 certificates from EDGE and Lotus. And as I mentioned, when we talk about health, it's also matters of mental health. And in terms of mental health, mental health relies a lot on the availability of amenities available to residents. So for each projects, we have basic amenities and advanced amenities. For example, there are meditation or Zen quarters, libraries. We're also considering a model in which we have the traditional medical house or traditional clinic, which provides citizens with traditional medicines. And in some project, we are piloting the building of plants that will recycle the food waste, which will convert the food waste from household use into fertilizers that they can use in order to for their gardening. Could you wrap up in 1 or 2 minutes? So we think that we are quite lucky that the owners, our boss, really have a long-term vision, emphasizing the importance of green design. So this is very crucial. And it has been a consistent aim to create buildings that are environmentally friendly. So by doing so, we also achieve good business result because we managed to convince customers to choose our project. So within the limited time allocated to me, I have shared with you some experiences from the projects that we have built. Thank you, Dung. And he highlights the role of owners and investors who are really willing and determined to invest in green buildings that will provide customers with housing products that can ensure both their physical health and also their mental well-being. I'm impressed when you say that in some of your projects you already incorporated some plants that can recycle household food waste into manure or fertilizers. Now may I invite Mr. Kwon from Flamingo Group. We look forward to your comments and the experiences that you share. He's the Deputy Director of Flamingo in charge of architecture. He's an architect himself, and his own way follow the philosophy of green buildings and bringing forests into homes. So as Mr. Howe mentioned, we're now trying to create green oasis in the middle of concrete buildings. So Mr. Kwon, who have received lots of awards in this aspect, will share his experiences with us. Greetings to all of you.
Xin chào các anh chị. Vừa rồi thì tôi cũng đã ngồi nghe suốt vào buổi.
I have listened to previous speakers. I followed the webinar from the beginning, and I'm very impressed by previous presentations. I'm impressed, for example, by the sharings of Mr. Howe and Mr. Dung. We are architects who have personally involved in the designs of buildings and also in the maintenance and the operations of building. I think we can agree with each other that essential functions of building is to serve human beings, their physical health, their mental well-being, their emotion, and their emotion depends on what they can touch, what they can see, what they can feel, what they can listen. It depends on ponds, on surfaces, on lakes, on building structure, on ventilation. So in all the buildings of our corporation, our design team always try to ensure that we tend to the feelings and emotions of the resident, of the people who will live there. People, as you know, they have many needs, work, life, family, socialization, working with each other. So the importance of building is to facilitate positive emotions and feelings, and that is exactly what we're trying to do with our design. As you can see in the presentation by Mr. Hao, the clone buildings which not only generates huge heat island effects, but also very emotionless. So why can't we change that situation? Why can't we design buildings that allowed us more emotions, allowed us to be closer to nature? So this building was built in 2015, a 12 stories building. For this building, you can see that we try to incorporate a large space of greens and balconies. So each balconies will serve as will create a shade. It will create a veranda. It functions like a veranda. The veranda will cool the air before the air enters the home. And when we build this building, which we call the forest in the sky, we want to utilize that idea. So the buildings will be covered with balconies, and the facade of the building faces the south, which minimize sun exposure, and the balconies will help cool the entire building down, and it allows the air to cool down before the air enters the inner space. And it also means that air ventilation will be maximized. And it reduces the impressions of concrete buildings. It allows the resident to feel that they are living in nature. So anyone sitting on the balconies, looking far away and looking down, people will feel that as if they are living not on 10-story, but actually on the ground. So in the building, we also try to save energies. For example, the balconies and the lobbies, the rear lobbies, a total of 5,000 square meters. So if you have to air condition the entire space, it will be very costly. And if you multiply that by every year, it will be a substantial cost. But when we design this building using natural air ventilation, it will be both economical and also good for people's health. We also try to make sure that air ventilation, natural air ventilation, won't have any negative effects. For example, we designed a system that allowed us to close and open airflow gates flexibly. So the air gates can be flexibly adjusted, closed and shut. So when the air is fresh, we will let the air in. During winter, it will be cold, and then we will shut the airflow gates in order to prevent a cold spell from entering the building. So basically, we will be able to utilize the positive airflow during summer. During summer, the air is fresh. In addition, as I mentioned, the building is covered with trees on the roof, on the balconies, and below. And the building, as you know, has been in existence for 6 years. And you can see that the trees really grow well in the building. So maintenance is a big issue. So in this building, we design automatic watering system, and we also choose the kind of trees that not only provide large shades, but also trees that are resilient. Of course, we need to see the kind of tree that are most suitable, because they should both prevent sunlight exposure, but at the same time, they should allow air ventilation, and the trees that at least create some positive emotion. About the automatic watering system, we need water for that. And then for that reason, we design a rainwater recollection system. So this building emits almost zero sewage system. All the waters are recycled. From daily use water or rainwater, everything will be collected and processed using a central system. The water will be processed in accordance with Vietnamese standards, and it will be resupplied to different functions, for example, for watering trees or for toilet flushing. So on the waste, water waste is fully recollected and recycled. And at the moment, we try to incorporate this design in every buildings that we have. So the idea is to create more green space wherever possible. And this is kind of building design will be particularly useful in area where we have low rainfall and serious water shortage. It will be very effective in those contexts. So water recollection is an urgent requirement in our buildings, and I think we should attempt to do so wherever possible. Because in many areas, we believe that people are facing water shortage, and we will face water shortage very soon if we still overuse our underground water without any attention to water recycling and the utilization of rainwater, which is what we see in our cities nowadays. At our group, Flamingo Group, we told our architects that whenever we build a new construction, we must make sure that people living in it feel as if they're living in nature. And for that reason, we try to incorporate green, naturally friendly spaces inside the buildings. Certainly, doing so requires sophisticated architectural designs and engineering. This building function like a hotel. And for that reason, we need to ensure that the cost of the cost of maintenance is kept to the minimum level. So I just share with you just one example of what we have done. But I hope that our experience will be of use to you, to Vietnamese architect who will be able to reproduce this design and improve it elsewhere. My thanks to Dr. Kwon. He gave us the perspective of an investor who really care about green design. And in this building, he shared with us the importance of green spaces and the importance of paying attention to maintenance, how to maintain green spaces in an economical way and in an environmentally friendly way. We need automatic watering system. We need rainwater recollection and recycling. Right? So we all know that green spaces are important, but it will require sophisticated engineering and design solutions in order to ensure maintenance is sustainable. We listen to the sharings of two experts, which really complements the perspective raised by our three speakers in the presentation sessions. We have learned about different innovative green designs that can facilitate the physical and mental health of residents. The two latest commentators give us very practical experiences on how green designs have been used in practice. Now, I will open the floors to all participants. If you have comments, please raise your hands using the hand raising function.
Ánh Nguyệt đã trình bày đấy ạ. Chị thử xem trong chat ấy.
Trong hộp chat thì em có thấy là
anh Hoàng Mẫn Nguyên đấy. Sau đó thì đến trình cho Thủy nữa, mấy người đấy.
Không biết anh Hoàng Mạnh Nguyên còn có tham gia trực tiếp
I
không ạ?
see a question by Mr. Hoàng Mạnh Nguyên. Is he from here? Is still on? It's in the chat box. So he has a question. He has a question for Nguyệt from CAST. So in your research, how planning and design can contribute to living standards in cities? How designs and architecture affects living standards in cities? My thanks to the question. I'm not sure I'm in the best position to answer the question because there are more experts here who may be more equipped to answer the question than I am. But allow me to respond in my own way. In the set criteria I showed you, there is the dimension on space. Those dimensions points to the importance of designs and architecture to living standards. For example, public spaces, community-based spaces, and sustainable transportation. So basically, we want to place the responsibility on urban planners and architects. Because after I listened to Mr. Hao and Mr. Dũng, and they all emphasize the importance of incorporating more green spaces in buildings. We know that green spaces will improve the living standards for citizens. It will create more positive emotion, etc. But I want to add that we need more to ensure a sense of community. I understand that as architects working in an environment, in an urban context, I assume that you are often asked to pay attention to customers who are able to pay. However, at the same time, our research wants to emphasize the aspect of equality. So the sense we're trying to promote is that we want to create spaces that ensure a sense of community and equality for everyone. I'm currently living in New Zealand, and a friend of mine told me they used to have a villa, a very big villa. The villa are protected by security guards with guns. They say that the building where they live is surrounded by barbed wire. And they say that people in the surrounding, people in the neighborhood are much poorer. So they're afraid that the villa may be the targets of robbery. So again, the problem, sorry, I should have mentioned that my friends are living in Malaysia. And later on, because they feel that they don't want such a life anymore, and they move to New Zealand instead. So back to the example of my friends, when they're living in Malaysia, the problem is that they have a buildings that suits their own needs. But the problem is that the surrounding social environment do not support, do not give them a sense of peace, safety. So basically, in order to design a building that is good for one, you also need to design buildings that is good for everyone. If you facilitate an oasis for the rich in the middle of a city, living the majority of people in a state of impoverishment, living in the surrounding, it will probably create a sense of insecurity even for the rich people living in that large buildings. So perhaps there are many solutions to address this problem. For example, UN Habitat, they proposes that we should dedicate a section around 20% of space in a city or in any apartment area for social housing. So the idea is that we can create a more balanced distribution of resources and opportunity and allows people living together to enjoy a more balanced life instead of a situation in which some people living in one extremes of wealth and the majority living in another. And this brings me back to the point made by Mr. Hao about the village. In a village, there are rich and poor, but the village in Vietnam always have a mechanism to redistribute the wealth in ways that avoid a situation of extreme inequality as a means to ensure harmonious life. My thanks to Nguyệt. Other speakers, do you want to respond to Mr. Nguyen? Thủy, Mr. Thiep, there's an audience. Mr. Thiep, he raises his hands. And we will open their microphone. We will allow them to open their microphone on their own. So before I invite Mr. Thiep, allow me to check whether the panelists are happy with the response by Mrs. Nguyệt. Okay, if you have no further comments, now may I invite Mr. Thiep. Please open your microphone and go ahead with your question. There's another question. Somebody asked that I'm interested in how we can mobilize the investors and the state to invest in green building, but for low-income communities, because at the moment green design are only used in high-end buildings, which are only available to middle class and upper class people. So this is a comment, Mrs. Tree. I'm wondering whether you want to respond to this. We know that green buildings requires higher ratio investment, and naturally, we believe that the buildings at the moment only targets people of the middle and upper classes. But then again, this question raised the issue of how we can attract investor to build buildings that are green, but which targets people of relatively lower income. Miss, can you hear me? Well, if you look at villages in the Red River Delta in northern part of Vietnam, we build buildings that are relatively cheap, one story, with ponds in the front, with gardens in the surrounding. So even our peasants who are relatively poor can still build environmentally and green houses for relatively low cost. We can also build environmentally friendly buildings for workers. So I don't see any reason why poorer people cannot live in green buildings. And it makes sense. For example, as you see in my example of the workers village in Lào Cai, so it was quite cheap. It was 6 million Vietnamese dong per square meters, the cost of investment, I mean. And then they managed to build buildings for workers, for low income people. We utilize simple but environmentally friendly design. We try to design buildings, the types of trees that requires minimal maintenance. So on the balcony of the workers village that I showed you, we designed tap in every places, which allows the residents to water their trees in easy and simple way. And if we use light materials and the buildings which are not so tall, the cost of construction will be reduced simply because we don't need to spend an enormous amount of money on the foundation. And ventilation is also crucial. We need to create spaces between buildings to maximize ventilation. And if we maximize ventilation, it will help reduce the cost of an electricity consumption for cooling. So one immediate suggestion is that when we build new buildings, we should try to allocate more land for the construction. Nowadays, we're trying to pack buildings in a very limited space, which is impossible to maximize land use and the utilization of natural lighting and cooling. So, for example, the state should give a tax exempt to enterprises that invest in green buildings. We should allocate more land to those buildings. So if an enterprise is willing to invest in green buildings for social housing and for workers, the state should give them some preferential treatment. My thanks to Dr. Hao. You really remind us of many points that Douglas already raises in his first presentation, which is that we need to incorporate green design at the beginning of any project. And we need to consult people from different backgrounds, from investors, from users, from planners. So it's very clear that if we can do that, we will be able to reduce the cost substantially, and in the long term, green buildings certainly will save us a substantial amount of money. And it really makes sense to me that when we build social housing, when we want to build buildings for poorer people, we need to ensure that they have access to green living environments simply because they cannot afford a substantial cost on energy and so forth. Capital House, you have Mr. Dũng from Capital House. Do you have anything to share? Because I know that your corporation already have many experiences in building green buildings in social housing projects. So thank you for your question. At Capital House, So our first projects are actually social housing projects, and we actually received the certificate of the green certificate for one of such project, the Eco Home 3. As Mr. House say, we need to incorporate standards on green design at the conception phase of the project. Because at the conception phase will determine the cost of investment, the cost of buildings, and other things. If we mainstream green design criteria at the beginning, it will save us lots of money. We don't have to change the design later on. So according to our estimation, when we build the Eco Home 3 quarter,
rơi vào khoảng 1% đến 1,5%.
The extra cost, which is the additional cost that we have to incur to incorporate green designs, is roughly 1.5%. But then it will save us a substantial amount every year. For example, energy consumption, water consumption. So for example, at the beginning for the green design, we need to spend 19 billion Vietnamese đồng for the green design. But then every year we save for electricity alone 5 billion. And then because we managed to mainstream the green design in the project building from the beginning, we managed to minimize the cost substantially, particularly the cost of maintenance. As you imagine, a project will be in operation for at least 50 or 70 years, and you can imagine how much money we can save for the duration, for the whole duration of the project. And one thing that we normally ignore is that when a building is classified as green, it will have very good communication effects. The customers, the potential buyers, will be a bit more willing to purchase our products if our buildings are certified as green. So from our experiences, we don't think that the incorporation of green design will increase the cost of building too much. By contrast, it will help us reduce the cost of maintenance in the long run. And we are trying to reproduce this idea elsewhere, for example, in the city of Quy Nhơn in the south, and we managed to offer housing products with the green designs at a relatively reasonable cost. My thanks to Mr. Dũng. In the chat box, we receive another question, which I think is directed to you. So somebody asked, is there any capital house project being built that are certified as green? And what is the estimated cost? So I just mentioned from the beginning. At the moment, Capital House has completed 3 social housing projects, Eco 1, Eco 2, and Eco 3. And so Eco 1 and 2 incorporate some elements of green design, but not all. But the Eco 3, Eco Home 3 is the first project which fully incorporate a full international standards. At the moment, we also have other Eco Life Capital, Eco Life Capital in Tô Hiểu Street. So at the moment, the 3 buildings have received the Edge Green certificate. And we also have an office building. The office building has received the Lotus certificate. We also have another project, Eco Home Phúc Lợi and Eco Light Tây Hồ in the West Lake. So those are the major projects in Hanoi. We also have a series of projects. For example, the Eco City Premier in the Central Highland, and all of the projects have green design standards. And there are also projects in Quy Nhơn as well. Just a very quick response to your question. So in Hanoi, we have 3 social housing projects and 2 projects that targets middle income buyers. My thanks to Mr. Dũng for the question.
Chị có câu hỏi gì không?
Nếu như mà cuối cùng vì chúng ta còn có 5 phút là hết thời gian
So I just want to remind you that we are really running out of time. Well, I agree. So perhaps we need to wrap up quickly. So I wish to thank all the speakers and the panelists. We have the 3 keynote speakers, Douglas Snyder, Mrs. Nguyệt, and Mr. Hào, together with our 2 experts, Mr. Dũng and Quân. Now I return the floor to the chair, to the moderator, for the wrap-up session. My thanks to Thủy. My thanks also to panelists for staying with us in the last 3 hours. I wish to thank, this is the webinar organized by CCSB of Husei, University of Hamburg, and the KAS. At the moment, we still have 367 people staying with us. This is a really big success, showing that this webinar and this topic receive a substantial interest from the society. And as Dr. Hào say, this is very much an issue of contemporary relevance. We wish to thank all the speakers, Mr. Douglas Snyder, Mr. Nguyệt, Dr. Hào, Mr. Quân, and Mr. Dũng for fascinating and very practical presentation and comments which contributes many ideas to how we develop green building design and sustainable neighborhood development in Vietnam. We also want to thank Madame Phương from CAS, Mr. Weber, Madame Thủy, Mr. Dũng, and Mrs. Phương. I wish to thank the international cooperation departments and other departments of Husei for supporting the webinar. I also want to thank all the audience, your participation. I want to thank Mr. Việt Hà from and his communication team. The HOPE project look forward to receive your further support in the next 3 years in order to facilitate our goals of sharing the philosophy of green buildings and urban health. I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar by the end of September. I wish you good health and success in your future contribution to sustainable development in urban cities in Vietnam, and see you again.
Hội thảo rồi nhưng mình vẫn còn mấy phút nữa trước khi chính thức đến chương trình ý, thì ban tổ chức rất là mong được nếu như mà các diễn giả vẫn còn ở trên diễn đàn.
This is an informal request. So the speakers I'm wondering if you have some recommendations for Vietnam to improve the to improve the use of green buildings in Vietnam. Each of you maybe one recommendation, one or two.
Should we start with Douglas first?
Yeah, sure. There's so many, but I'll go with it'd be great if the government prioritize public building as being green buildings. So government buildings getting certified.
So it is like a policy, more incentives, more support for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
And anything else or?
No, I'll pass it on for somebody else.
Thank you. Xin mời chị Nguyệt ạ.
Tôi có ý kiến như này.
Anh Hào.
Tức là góc độ những cái người làm.
So from the perspective of an architect, I encourage you to eat lots of green vegetables. So we should encourage people to eat more green vegetable to facilitate the markets. And so just that.
Em tưởng là phải uống đủ nước thì mới khỏe được.
Rồi, nhất quán đó bên trong.
Đầu tiên từ bên trước. Nguyệt thì sao ạ? Từ kinh nghiệm của chị.
Nguyệt, how about you? What do you think we should make green design more popular in Vietnam? So I think again we still need to pay more attention to more vulnerable groups in the community. So from my experiences, if you don't pay attention to vulnerable groups, the green design and sustainable buildings wouldn't be sustainable. So again, I agree with you. A healthy and sustainable communities are communities that are inclusive, right? I'm not sure how I should use the term inclusive, but inclusive is important. So that is the good term to use. Inclusive. I think Quân has left. And Dũng has left as well. Tuấn and Michael and Hà. Do you have anything to add? And Phương? Thủy, please.
Xin cảm ơn mọi người. Thì tôi cũng tại vì tôi là một tổ chức làm các việc liên quan đến môi trường và xã hội.
Thank you. as an organization working in the field of society environment.
Các cái những cái người mà thu nhập từ trung lưu trở lên ý thì là tôi thấy đã có.
So I think people from the middle class and above, they have many potential and conditions to live a green life, but similar to what we pay more attention to vulnerable groups, the people of lower income. So I propose that perhaps Hussein may make some policy recommendation or work with enterprises to increase the participations of enterprises in the building of green buildings for poorer people. Mr. Howe, for example, he has a model, and one of the projects that he shared with us, I consider the project very equitable, and it can meet the needs of people of low income background to access a green way of life. So I hope that the model of the workers' village that he mentioned can be replicated elsewhere, not just in a single place, a single province. Maybe his model can become the norm in social housing to ensure that everyone are entitled to green living. So we should not pay attention only to people who are financially capable.
Cái hội thảo này sẽ đề xuất những chính sách.
And I hope that this Hope series can propose some policy recommendation of such kind, and Mr. Howe can provide us with more models